Okay, welcome all you citizens of the world, you friends, you family, you neighbors, you brothers and sisters. From Chicago, I'm Michael James. I'm here along with Emilio Davis in the background, who's doing the engineering, and we're here for you with another episode, another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. Since the time of the pandemic, we've been doing them via Zoom, and this is number 111 since the pandemic began. And this one is being recorded on the 22nd of July for the week of July 23rd, and it will be on air 9 a.m. Saturday, Tuesday, and Friday on WLUW 88.7 and WLUW.org, and then later on youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos, as well as Spotify and Google Podcasts. Couple of good things real quick. Last week, some of you saw the show. We did an interview with Chick Street Man, and he's in town for Pearls Rollin' with the Blues, a play up at the Writers Theater in Glencoe. And I went up on Wednesday, and it was really wonderful. The last days you could see it will be on Saturday afternoon and Saturday night, the 23rd. So do it if you can. Another good thing is the national program to combat HIV in Botswana was launched 23 years ago when HIV transmission rates from mothers to newborns was at 40%. Last week, the World Health Organization celebrated that number that has dropped to less than 1%. That's a good thing. A bad thing that Katie Hogan has pointed out, I want you all to pay close attention to, is the Obergefell, Obergefell, if that's spelled right, and Hodges was the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court's decision that legalized same-sex marriage in 2015. It's now being threatened for real. Imagine the concern of losing that right with children involved, healthcare decisions, etc. Some of the bad guys are Ted Cruz and Clarence Thomas. They want it overturned. And if we don't turn the Senate or maintain a better lead in Congress, we face the specter of a red-blue state divide that's worse than it is now. Biden has COVID. Alexandria Cortez and other House Democrats, including our own Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, were arrested in an abortion rights demonstration. A friend of ours, Dave Moberg from In These Times, a writer, activist, he passed away, another sad situation. Our guests, both Don Rose and Marguerite Horberg, will mention him today, and when we talk with them. We also are going to have our friend Russ Bradford come on and talk a little bit about Bobby Byrd, who passed away in El Paso, and we're going to share some information about Bobby. On the heat front, the heat roils over the planet. Fires are burning in Europe and the US. Climate emergency that Biden is talking about, but hasn't yet declared. There's a lot of senators, including Bernie, who are pressing him to enact some climate change executive actions. I also saw an NPR report on the melting of glaciers. I didn't see it, I heard it. It's heavy. So turn off that air conditioner, turn it lower, et cetera, et cetera. And on the voting front, I just want to say, if you want to get your midterm election practice started, join Network 49 and other allies writing postcards on behalf of electing 2 Illinois Supreme Court justices in District 2 and 3. Reach out to Katie Hogan. That would be Katie Hogan on Facebook. She will share more information of how to be involved in the postcards for the court thing that's going on. On the labor front, I was going to read just a list of all the stories about Starbucks. It's full tilt, it's going on. Starbucks is fighting back. There's charges and counter charges, but a lot of advancement. And on the sports front, Noah Lyles led the sweep, the US sweep of the 200 meter at the World Championship. It's the fastest man to win the 200. He broke Michael Johnson's record that has stood for 22 years. The USA also swept the 100 meter race too. It's been on USA channel. I think it will still be on. If you're watching this Saturday morning, you probably can find it. Congratulations, Noah Lyles. And remember, do sports, not war. Okay, we'll be right back with our first guest. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. You're listening to Live from the Heartland. You may be watching it. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad you're here with me. Thank you. Well, really glad to have as our next guest someone we've known a long time who's been real active in and around Chicago, bringing about justice for the people, the one, the only Marguerite Horberg. And we're having her on today because today is the day before she has her 35th anniversary for the wonderful Hot House over this weekend, the 23rd and 24th of July. There'll be some free music and a lot of other things going on. So Marguerite, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your 35th anniversary celebration. Give us some information, and then I want to grill you a little bit about the history of the Hot House and your own political history and travel history. So good morning to you.
Thank you, Michael. It's really an honor to be invited by you, and I really appreciate the attention. The festival is actually only one day. It's tomorrow or today. We're on today, Saturday.
Yeah, we're recording on Friday, and it'll broadcast for the live listeners and the streamers on Saturday. They'll know.
So there's room for everyone. It's at 3947 South Michigan Avenue. It's the yard adjacent to the Chicago Youth Center. And we have a really wonderful all-day, all ages free program available through the City of Chicago grant. We're bringing in Burnt Sugar Orchestra from New York and two Chicago favorites, Marvin Tate's, Keith Kelly Poets, Tara Betts the MC, Ed Wilkerson's Trio Waz with Michael Zarang and Tatsu Aoki. Special guest Ronnie Malley, and Fred Jackson's Erudition Project with many members from the AACM collective.
So well, that sounds like quite an event. And it starts at what time?
It starts at 3 p.m. is the art making with Mikael, where you can make your own jewelry and go home with some bling and flash it during the show. So there's something for everyone.
And what time does the music start?
Music starts at 4, and there's also a nice tribute to Greg Tate, who's one of the grandfathers of Black music criticism, who passed away last year, and there'll be some poetic tributes to Tate.
Now, let me ask you, Marguerite, is this an outdoor event?
It's outdoors. It's going to be hot, hot, hot. So
hot with a threat of rain.
Bring your chair, bring your shade, bring your water. We're going to try to socially distance, and we'll have some complimentary masks available.
Well, for those people who will either see this on YouTube or hear it on the air on Tuesday or Friday, we're on at 9, not only Saturdays, but Tuesday and Friday. They won't be able to come, but why don't you give them and me again a little bit of history about the Hot House. You've been around 35 years, you're celebrating that. And I've known you for a long time, and you've been all around the city with putting on events. Even back in the old days, you did a few up at the Heartland Cafe, but you had some permanent locations. And tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, thank you. I just also want to tell people that it's going to be live streamed. So if you feel like it's too hot or you're not going to be able to come out, we'll be on, go to our Facebook page, Hot House Chicago, and you can see the live concert. So yeah, Michael, we started, many of your listeners on this show remember the glory days of Harold Washington. And so many of us were inspired by that campaign. And Hot House was launched kind of in parallel with the victory of Harold Washington. So our first event was the All Chicago artist tribute to Harold Washington. And when we did that event, we decided to become a permanent nonprofit organization. And like you've said, we've had two pretty robust cultural centers. The first was in Wicker Park, And at the time we were in Wicker Park, we were allied with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center and the Fair Share organization. And so our political work, even though we were a cultural organization, was very keen on retaining industrial retention in Wicker Park, the Job Save Stuart Warner campaign, and keeping some of the industry in that area was some of the things we were allied with. So we were also very early in the game at supporting queer culture and did a lot of programs for AIDS activism, HomoCore, and a lot of things to have town halls where we really tried to encourage and perpetuate the legacy of Harold after his demise. So we were always kind of centered in the intersection of culture and social justice. And in the early 80s, we were fortunate, as was the Heartland, to bring people who were working on Nicaragua solidarity with El Salvador, the ANC. Many of these organizations, if people can recall, were actually on the terrorist list back in the 80s, the ANC was. And so we were very pleased to use Hot House as a place where people could raise money and raise consciousness, and to build sort of an internationalist relationship with people around the world, people in Chicago who had international connections, and to really advance the cultural dialogue about how to have a multiracial coalition of people interested in justice and actually from a socialist point of view.
Well, let me read to you something I got probably off your website, but it's about your mission is to instigate, produce, and otherwise facilitate participatory, multidisciplinary events that create opportunities for high caliber artistic practices that extend our collective resources into underserved communities and foster the international exchange of ideas and methods within the context of progressive social change praxis. I haven't heard that word practice for a while. Will you translate that for us and tell us, after you gave us some history, what your mission is?
Well, our mission, kind of what I just said, is to be a catalyst, really, and to amplify the voices of people who are somehow related to social justice causes and missions, including artists, including understanding that culture and music is a primary driver for unifying people, that most social movements have a cultural component. And so throughout history, all great progressive movements have had artists and troubadours and visual artists and filmmakers as part of their advance forward. So we see ourselves playing that role and facilitating that, and using our kind of collective resources to join with others who really want to push those messages forward.
Well, both you and I, when I say I say the Heartland along with Katie, we both brought in various bands, but one of them was Pablo Menendez and the band Mezcla. And one of the things I've noticed about you is that you have a great interest in Cuban music. You traveled to Cuba. You want to tell us a little bit about bringing Cubans to the States? I know in our case, we during the Bush years, they couldn't come, but before that and after that, we brought them, as did you.
Michael, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, I was just in Cuba. I was just with Pablo, actually, and we're going to try to screen, and maybe we can work with you to screen the documentary about his amazing mother, Barbara Dane. I think that, to me, Cuba has always been a beacon of what's possible. And, we try to go there and we try to take people there and we try to have these exchanges, because I think in the world right now, in the US, we live really in a bubble. And, once you get out of the bubble,
especially in the 49th ward.
I just think it's so important to meet people who, even if it's a struggling experiment and it has its own flaws, that people are committed to the process of trying to create new men and new women, as they say. And so, our work in Cuba has been not only because it's just an amazing font of culture, not only music, but film and literature and the visual arts, but just talking to people who are so committed personally and culturally to progressive ideals is so important right now. I just feel like we're besieged in this country with, as King said, the nattering nabobs of negativity, and just to be able to hear and be around people who are struggling against enormous odds, but still making such dynamite work is really refreshing. So our project, we have a new project, which is making a documentary about Guantanamo. And it's about how Afro-descendant people have maintained their cultural traditions in spite of being in the shadow of the most notorious prison on earth. And so we just spent time there in the last 2 weeks filming and interviewing some of these cultural treasures. So, I think, we also were able to pass a resolution in Chicago to end the blockade. And I think that it's really important that everybody push Biden to act, because, he hasn't done anything. And in fact, it's almost worse than it was. It's definitely worse than Obama. People are really suffering right now. And it's really important for people who have any kind of heartbeat to actually pick up their phone.
You mentioned Barbara Dane, Pablo's mother, and I was always impressed that I remember her as a folk singer after she was a jazz and blues singer.
Yeah.
And I know she took Pablo as a young kid who was on the streets in Berkeley, took him to Cuba, and he really never came back. But we did, for people who want to know a little bit more about her, we did interview her in the last 6 months, I believe. And if you go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos and punch in her name, you can see that interview.
I heard, that was a good one. Yeah.
Now, I saw somewhere else that you've been called a jazz hero. And do you know where that came from and what that refers to?
Yes, it was after a long spell, but thankfully I was recognized. And that was the Jazz Journalist Association. And the president, Howard Mandel, lives in Chicago. He will be giving the Lifetime Jazz Journalist Association Award on Saturday today to Jared Nickerson, who's the co-founder of Burnt Sugar Artistic Orchestra Chamber for Greg Tate, who I mentioned earlier. So I feel like I'm in esteemed company. There's a lot of great jazz journalists, jazz heroes, and jazz community in the world.
We love jazz.
Yeah.
And speaking of jazz, I'm not sure you saw any or heard any, but I've noticed some reporting about your travel in your youth, but also Katie wanted me to ask if you've taken any good trips lately. And I think she was referring to you just were in Africa. So how about a little background on you, where you came from, a couple of things that influenced you, and what it was like in Africa?
I appreciate that. I know you just went to Greece, and I know you're a great photographer and chronicler, and I have lots and lots and lots of photos from the 70s when I went overland from Chicago to Japan to through Afghanistan and Iran, right in a small period of time when you could actually go overland before the Soviets came into Afghanistan and before the ascendancy of the Ayatollah in Iran. So It was quite a phenomenal experience. I was away for almost 3 years on $3,000 total. So that taught me how to budget, stretch a dollar. And I think when I came back, what was so important was just realizing from my travels that people so much want the same things, which are to have peace in their home and to raise their kids and to experience love and security and culture. And so I just found that to be my life's calling was to find some kind of place where people could feel at home and have great hospitality, to understand and learn from each other, and to kind of pierce the bubble that I just talked about of the preponderance of the capitalist messaging in this country that really is so stifling, and to just create a place where people could talk to each other and learn from each other's culture, build bridges. So the site that we're having our event Saturday, July 23rd, 3947 South Michigan, we're trying to purchase for the new hot house. And we've put an offer in to buy that site. And so it's kind of my last gasp of energy will be to try to build a permanent home in Chicago for internationalist culture and this kind of exchange, and for social justice groups to be able to meet and strategize and figure out how to advance progressive culture in the city. And one of the things I think that really distinguishes Hot House from every other place that's ever existed is our independent commitment to multicultural, anti-racist, progressive values. And so that's what we hope to establish.
Oh, that's great to hear. Ever since Katie and I sold the Heartland, every once in a while I think, oh man, I'd like to get another place, have exhibits, movies, people come through, a little music.
Yeah.
But at 80 years old, I don't think I'm going to do that. But I'm really, I commend you for giving it a shot. And if you need help, I wouldn't mind getting together and sharing some thoughts.
Thanks, Michael.
One last thing before I let you go is a good friend of both of ours, a noted journalist, a progressive journalist here in Chicago, David Moberg, just passed away. It seems like it's happening a lot these days. Will you share maybe a memory about David Moberg? Because I know I have Don Rose either coming on before you or after you, depends how it works.
Last week was really tough, not only for the loss of David, but we lost Hannah Hayes, was a longtime board member of Hot House, and she was also just killed tragically in a bizarre freak hit and run in Hyde Park. But David was just an extraordinary human being. The most, they sort of have these fantasy people that you want to have dinner with because they're the most brilliant, encyclopedic kind of interests. And David, no matter what we'd start talking about, he just was so generous and smart and interesting, and our interests really aligned. Like, he had amazing art in his house, amazing anthropological, ethnographic collections, posters, books. He loved jazz, he loved cooking. He was just a super friendly, down-to-earth person with no pretense, and just enormous, wonderful person. And also, not to diminish his wife, Jo, who I similarly have so much affection for, and their children, Carl and Sarah. So it's a huge loss. And unfortunately in Chicago, it seems like the bad people they're like cockroaches. They just keep living, and all the good people are going away.
Okay, one more time, your event, which is on Saturday. Those of you who listen on WLUW.org or where it's streamed, or at 88.7 FM on Saturday, you'd be able to go. So give us the address of the Hot House's 35th anniversary celebration. The address one more time, and then
the easiest thing
website.
is always hothouse.net, hothouse.net. That will tell you everything. The event's live streamed on our website, hothouse.net. And the address for the live event is 3947 South Michigan, hopefully the future home of Hot House.
Well, I look forward to seeing you around, and maybe it'll even be on Saturday.
Okay.
Depends.
Come on down.
It's great to have you on, Marguerite.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Okay. You are listening to the Live from the Heartland show on WLUW 88.7, our home base. It's also on youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos, as well as Spotify and Google Podcasts, and of course on Can TV too. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of your dial. Don't go anywhere else. We got more information and things to share with you. Well, I'm really happy to bring on our next guest. Many of you who've listened to this show or watched this show in person at the old Heartland, or on TV, on Can TV, know about Don Rose. Don Rose has been around for a while, and he's an older guy, and I do believe in age before beauty. So I've looked up to him on a lot of fronts, but I always kind of look to the older guys for leadership, and he is someone who keeps me abreast of various issues with the writings that he does. And it's always an honor when someone wants to know about the 60s and they pull me and him and Marilyn Katz and other people in together. I'm going to take this opportunity to ramble around the world with Don, asking him questions about his opinion on what's going on. So good morning to you, brother. How are you?
I'm doing all right for an old guy.
So you just told me you're 92?
Come September.
I wouldn't have believed that. I'm only 80, and you look much better than me. So congratulations and good luck to the future for both of us.
Yeah, thank you.
So you do a column every week that I get, and I don't know how people sign up for it. You might want to share that. But in a recent column, you talked about how you're an optimist and you try not to be Pollyannish. And I always, I'm a pretty optimistic dude, an optimistic kind of dude. Sometimes I border on being Pollyannish. Tell us about your basic look on life and how that developed and where it has taken you.
Well, my basic outlook on life comes from when I was very, very young. I started reading in the encyclopedia about democracy, fascism, socialism, and socialism sounded pretty good. And I have just kept moving along with that. I'm one of these guys, they say consistency is a virtue of small minds. So I must have a very small mind because I haven't really changed my fundamental socialist outlook in all those years.
Right on, brother. I'm glad there's some of us out there because it seems like socialism is on the rise. Unions are on the rise. There's a lot of negativity out there, but there are a lot of good things. Is there anything really good that's happening that you would want to direct our attention to?
Well, there's only good signs. It may be, and some smart guys like Paul Krugman seem to think that inflation has peaked and that we may be beginning to decline. As you may have noticed, the price of gas nationally has dropped by $0.50. Yeah, since this is the biggest issue against the Democrats right now, it is possible that if this is correct, that prices may drop enough in the next couple of months before November, so that the Democrats, Biden perhaps, will get some credit for their efforts to abate it. Now that's iffy, but the markets would seem to suggest right now that the markets are going back up again. That affects, people who have 401ks or IRAs or whatever. It's more than just the big capitalists who are in the market these days. So I think that is the single most optimistic thing. The second most optimistic thing is that the Supreme Court ruling on abortion has not only brought people to march in the streets and scream and yell, which is all fine to do, but it has actually begun to move people politically, and that was going to be the big question. Abortion and guns have moved up to with inflation among the top three issues right now. Now that is to the advantage, obviously, of Democrats who face an awful lot of pressure going in the other direction, and particularly history, which shows that in 9 out of 10 or more cases, the party in power in the presidency gets clobbered in the midterms. This happened to Obama, as you well know. It happened to Trump. So those are among the strands of optimistic signs that I see. I have to point out that these are only slight harbingers, and we have a short time for these things to develop.
Well, there's a lot of talk all the time about how the Republicans are favored to take back the House, maybe the Senate. Being a kind of a border on Pollyannish kind of a dude, I'm not sure that that'll come to be. But what is your actual take on where things are at in terms of the Democrats' chances? There are some places where they look like they might pick up some that will lose. Is it as dire as it's been predicted in the mainstream media?
Well, I can't read the House because there have been so many remaps going on and changes and things. I can say that the Senate looks like a good possibility. I think in the Senate, for the most optimistic thing I can say is that we can hold what we've got. I don't see any of the so-called endangered Democrat incumbents losing at this point. And there are as many as 4 potential turnaround seats. What we really need to do is gain +2 so that we can obviate the influence of Manchin and to a lesser extent Sinema. The potentials that I see are Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, and Wisconsin.
Not much chance for Deming in Florida?
I would put her in a secondary category. It's possible. In a big turnaround, that's there. She's looking very good right now, and it would be absolutely delicious to take that seat away from the unnameable. Be almost as good as knocking over Cruz. Anyway, yeah, I would say she's showing better than I had expected at the moment. So I don't know if I'm ready to add her to the top 4, but she's right under that.
Do you have any predictions on 2 governors' races that I'm watching? It's Stacey Abrams in Georgia and Beto O'Rourke in Texas.
I would say that those are both feasible, but I would have to say that in both instances, I would deem them slightly behind right now. I mean, they're looking good with tied numbers and so on. The fact is, I think that Georgia is slightly more possible than Texas. But Texas is still within reason there because Abbott is looking worse and worse to people, and we may just get the abortion issue, and as well as the stupid handling of the Uvalde murders, the policing there make Abbott more vulnerable than he looked at the beginning. So it's they're in the game, but I have to say it's slightly less than even.
Let me ask you about a lot of talk these days about kind of, for lack of a better word, the gentrification of the Democratic Party and the loss of blue collar voters, as well as, since we were talking about Texas, a shift among some Latinos to the GOP side, the Republican side. Any thoughts on that? How the Democrats hold or expand their blue collar base and don't lose too many Latinos to the Republicans, perhaps over abortion issues?
I would say that the most important thing here is to show and demonstrate some economic progress, which people don't yet see because of inflation. The Democrats, in fact, the Biden administration thus far has made some very substantial moves that does not seem to have permeated the public consciousness, because they're more absorbed by the gas pump and the grocery store. If those abate and we can and make some announcements about fixing up, getting the infrastructure going and relieving the economic pressures, I think we have a chance of winning some back and retaining and winning back both of those constituencies. But for some reason, for some time now, the trend has been in the other direction, and I would compare it to the decline in unionism. Now, if unionism begins to resurge, as it has, as we've seen in odd places like McDonald's and coffee shops,
Starbucks.
We will then perhaps begin to staunch the flow.
Don Rose, you've mentioned a couple of things that are influencing voters. We like to think that they go beyond the pocketbook and go for freedom and democracy and ideals. But what is your take on the January 6th commission in general? And do you think that will have any impact on voting?
I believe the January 6th commission has already had an influence. It hasn't changed many Republican minds, but to my mind, the most important thing is that it is, and of course, Democrats didn't need many mind changes, but it has had a significant influence on independents. And that is what is going to make the difference in the election if those independents stay Democratic. It's been a wonderful experience, fantastically well produced, and it as we inch along with it, it has begun to change minds. You can see, there are some pollsters such as Navigator, which have been tracking the influence of those appearances and those TV shows, and they're moving in the right direction. So, yesterday's did not seem quite as dramatic to me as the previous one, with Cassidy giving her views. But the most interesting thing to me is that the main narrative is coming from Ms. Cheney. And
I was going to ask you about how your take on Liz Cheney. All of a sudden she's everybody's hero, and I probably, if I was in Wyoming, I'd be voting for her.
I would too. So there is no hope of electing a Democrat there, and so even if you want to vote for a Democrat in the general election, if I was there, I'd certainly vote for her in the primary. Voting for her in the primary does not prevent you from changing your mind in the general election. But I have to say, I admire her principles, that on the principles on democracy, which I would never have attributed to her father.
Yeah, how about Illinois' son, Adam Kinzinger? Kinzinger.
The same thing to a slightly lesser extent. I'm quite gratified that one of the few Republicans who have exhibited that kind of integrity and sense of democracy came from Illinois. If I had the choice of putting, well, he's leaving the Congress, but I would certainly vote for a Democrat against him in the general election, but that's not an issue. But I have to admire the courage, because he's obviously taken an awful lot of crap for his position.
Well, I got two more names I'm going to throw at you, and you can love them or hate them, but I don't think you'll love them. The first would be Josh Hawley, who we watched running through the halls last night. That would have been Thursday night when we were watching the January 6th commission. And after they show him with his fist pump, kind of supporting the insurrectionists, then he's running through the hallways of Congress trying to escape those people. Any take on him?
Pure hypocritical scum. He even before the fist pump, he came up with some of the most ridiculous statements. He was kind of a conservative in the background. He went when he won his seat for the Senate. He was kind of a blah conservative, and then he turned nutcase, or seemed to. Taking all kinds of cues from Trump and saying maybe that's the direction to go. But I just find him totally disgusting.
Okay, one other guy who, we wanted to like and we hoped he would change, but he keeps sticking it to us. And that would be Mike Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, whose daughter is a big time investor and owner of some prescription drug companies, et cetera, et cetera. What's your take on Manchin? What should happen around him, and even Sinema in Arizona?
Sinema's not up for a couple of years. You can't, at the moment, throw Manchin out of the party, which one should do. I mean, he is a hypocritical, money-grubbing bastard, and but his one vote that is useful is keeping the Democrats in power. If he left us, we would once again be under the Republican regime in the Senate. So that's the only reason I say let's not excommunicate him. Let's make him unimportant by winning a couple of more seats, so it doesn't matter what he does. This is not the kind of man you want with his hands around your throat.
That's for sure. Let me see what else I got. Let's go to Illinois briefly. We don't have too much time left, but one of the things going on in Illinois that we're encouraging people to pay attention to is a couple of Supreme Court cases, elections. Any take on that and the importance of the Illinois Supreme Court staying with Democratic control?
Well, I think it's very important, particularly with the potential of the abortion issue coming up, and possibly even gay marriage or contraception. So I mean, the Democrats who are running, there's two potential seats. We've got to get them both. People have to work on those, and too often, we think of the top line, governor or president, and those other, and the fact that we've ignored things down ballot too often is why we're in the mess we're in right now. So just find, vote Democratic. I'm really sorry we no longer have the straight ballot punch.
I've been telling people, don't forget to vote unless you're voting Republican, and then I go into it. we're going to run out of time, but and we'll bring you back probably on numerous occasions. But let me finally ask you to focus on Chicago for a minute. We don't have an election until February. No, it's actually February 28th, I believe, and then April 4th for runoffs if people don't get 50%. A number of alderpersons are leaving, Harry Osterman and some other people. Any thoughts on the future aldermanic elections, people to watch, and any positions or thoughts on the mayoral race, Lori Lightfoot, et cetera?
Well, I don't know how some of these seats are going to go. There's some new people. My young man I've known all his life, Sam Royko, is running in the first ward. Some other people, my own alderperson, Michelle Smith, has just dropped out or said she's quitting. I don't know why. So I haven't really examined the field. The thing I can say right now is that I don't see a specific threat to Lori Lightfoot with all her faults and her problems, which we could enumerate at some other time. But the opposition is so scattered. The only one I see with any potential to get her into the runoff is Paul Vallis, but he has never done very well in elections. He doesn't seem to connect. And I was not a fan of the way he ran the school system. He was for charter schools and high stakes testing and so on. So I think Lightfoot's main strength right now is the fact that her opposition is weak and scattered, but that's the way it looks to me right now.
Well, we're going to bring you back for that. And I want to thank you for coming on, Don. You always give me a lot of food for thought, as they say. And I look forward to running into you in person pretty soon. Keep up the good work. You're a crucial dude in giving us the lay of the land. Thank you so much. With some more live from the Heartland here on the left end of your dial or on your screen, depending on how you're getting it. And last week, when Katie was doing the show, she talked to both Russ Byrd and Steve Yellen from El Paso doing basketball in the barrio and talking about that great program about 100 yards from the Mexico-US border in the Rio Grande. And back in the day, Russ was a customer at the Heartland Cafe. He ended up writing for the Heartland Journal. And at some point, he invited me down to El Paso to participate in Athletes United for Peace's basketball in the barrio that he and Steve produced. And they told a lot about it last week. But also what came up last week was one of the people I met down there, a wonderful fellow named Bobby Byrd, passed away. And Russ is going to share with us a little bit about Bobby Byrd, the poet, the publisher, and the citizen extraordinaire. And let me just say, Russ is a writer, and he has 4 books about basketball out. I took the pictures in some of them. All the Dreams We Dream is the last one, which is about shootings, killings on the West Side, and features Sean Harrington, who's also been a guest on the show. So after all that talk, good morning to you, Russ. I'm so glad I got you up early. No, I know you've been up since about 4. Take it away. Tell us about Bobby.
Well, Bobby Byrd was first and foremost a poet. He's born and raised in Memphis, during the 1940s and 50s. And Memphis, of course, was very different then. And one of the great things on his sort of resume, whether literary or not, was he went to Martin Luther King's last speech and marched with the garbage men before that. And so he was raised by a single mom. His father died in a plane crash training flyers in Mississippi. So he was raised by a single mom, but that also meant, in Memphis in the South in the 1950s, it wasn't easy for a woman to make a living on her own. And she had hired a lady to come over, an African-American lady named Tula came over and Bobby grew really close to her and sort of thought of her as his mother as well. And I think it sort of opened his head up to the racial injustice in the Mid-South. But he became a poet and moved to the Southwest, moved to New Mexico, and then went to school in Tucson, but was a well-regarded poet and was, on the verge of getting national acclaim as a poet. But then he and his wife, Lee Byrd, you can't really talk about Bobby Byrd without talking about Lee Merrill Byrd, the short story writer and novelist. And they started a press called Cinco Puntos Press, which means 5 Points in Spanish. The neighborhood they lived in El Paso, still to this day, is the 5 Points neighborhood. And Cinco Puntos Press started in their home. And I'll tell you what, Mike, they were either incredibly lucky or incredibly brilliant. The first writer they published was Dagoberto Gilb, who, to my ear, to this day, is still the best Chicano short story writer that's ever lived. But they published Dagoberto Gilb before anyone knew who he was. And so that book made a big splash, and other great writers were to follow. Luis Alberto Urrea, who lived in Chicago for many years, who wrote The Devil's Highway, and Benjamin Alire Sainz, who won the Penn Faulkner Award for Everything Begins and Ends at the Kentucky Club, the great short story collection.
I got a great photo of you and me at the Kentucky Club, a little juiced up, across the border in Juarez.
I deny the juicing part, but I do love the Kentucky Club. And then another book, a couple other books that really hit big for them. They did David Dorado Romo's Ringside Seat to a Revolution.
I love that book.
A nonfiction book with photos about El Paso's part in the Mexican Revolution. And then they fairly early in Cinco Puntos' existence, Bobby Byrd discovered Joe Hayes, the bilingual storyteller, and his book about La Llorona has sold 500,000 copies. And so they latched onto some pretty great writers fairly early in their career. I'm talking about Bobby Byrd, the poet, and Lee Merrill Byrd, the short story writer. And he was just regarded as sort of the godfather of the border literary scene for many, many years. And he had great wisdom and a great laugh. And he was extremely emotional and passionate. The other writer he's more or less discovered, he published Beto O'Rourke's book that Beto wrote with Susie Byrd about legalizing marijuana, but just the wisdom economically and politically and in every other way about legalizing marijuana. So it's a little bit of it leans towards an academic book, but it's a short book and really brilliant. And I'm always surprised that no one has ever really held that against Beto, but as the country has shifted from putting people in jail for marijuana to turning it into a business, that book never really caused the controversy I thought that it would.
Bobby used to come to camp in a regular way, and he was quite a basketball fan and player. We used to have the camp on Father's Day weekend, and on the early morning, all the counselors would gather together, and Bobby would read his poem. Can you tell us what that poem is, or do you have it there and want to read it?
Well, let's see. I do have it. It's a 4-page poem, Michael. I don't know.
Yeah, we won't read it now. Then we'll just tell people.
But the title of the poem is "Basketball is a Holy Way to Grow Old," and Bobby would read it to the coaches. It was sort of our invocation, our sort of our Sunday morning mass outside the basketball camp. We'd have one coach in there doing the warm-ups with the kids, and then the 25 other coaches would come outside. And Bobby would read that poem to us, "Basketball is a Holy Way to Grow Old." And as he came down with a lymphoma and a cancerous mass in his stomach. And I thought, who's going to read the poem this year? And I thought, well, I'll read it. And I thought, I can't read it. I'll crack. My voice will crack. And maybe his son-in-law, Eddie, would read. No, he's not. And then I finally had a good idea, Mike. I thought all the coaches went over to Bobby's house and we read the book to Bobby. He was in what turned out to be his deathbed because he died the next day. But we read him "Basketball is a Holy Way to Grow Old." It was like a Greek chorus where we were all reading at the same time. And it started pelting. Well, it started raining slowly when we started.
In El Paso, not a lot of rain usually.
Yes, it's very unusual. And there's times when it'll go 6 months without any rain, but it started raining in the midst of it. And then it started, really pelting rain down. But Bobby was fully conscious, and he called out to us when we were done and yelled to us, and we all yelled into him. And we couldn't get close to him because of the immune deficiency kind of stuff. And then the next day, I got a phone call that he had passed away. So it was quite a shock. It was 30 days from diagnosis to dying. But he had a huge footprint in my life, and I know in your life as well. And but he was just sort of regarded as sort of the I was Andre Cadrescu. I can never pronounce his name.
There are a few names that are rough.
that I'm fine on the Spanish names, but it was Cadrescu who called him the Border Bard, and so he was somewhat of a legendary figure on the border, but also really well known in publishing because Cinco Puntos Press won several important. Oh, and maybe the most interesting thing was he got an NEA grant to publish a book of poetry, and it turned out to be by Subcomandante Marcos, the revolutionary leader from Chiapas, Mexico. And when the NEA was sort of informed about what they were doing, publishing the book by a revolutionary, they reneged and pulled the funding from Cinco Puntos, and that became national. So he became more famous for the funding. It's like if you get a book banned, you're actually more famous.
Yeah.
And he got the book got pulled. And the NEA pulled their grant, but then the Lannan Foundation found out about it, and the book got tremendous traction. And that book, it's the Story of Colors by Subcomandante Marcos, had a long life, and it's difficult to find. It sold so many copies; they're constantly running out of copies.
Well, Russ Bradford, I want to thank you for sharing that. We're going to probably have you on the show for other reasons soon. I'm going to see you tomorrow when we go to a White Sox game. And for those people who want to know more about Bobby, if you go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos and you punch in Bobby Byrd's name, there are several parts of a long interview we did with him probably 6-7 years ago. And he was a wonderful guy, and we're certainly going to miss him. That said, thanks for coming on, Russ, and sharing all that.
All right, good. And God bless Bobby Byrd. And thanks, Mike.
All right. You've been listening to the Live from the Heartland show. We're here on WLUW 88.7. We're streamed at that site at WLUW.org. I want to thank all the people who make this show possible. Certainly Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, Lynn Orman, Emilio Davis, Imani Warren. And if I left anyone out, I'm sorry about that, but we'll get you in next week. There's a lot to do in the world out there. The world needs all the good and the effort that you and I and everyone else puts into it. So get off your derrieres and have a great day. And let's take it to the limit with bringing about some real significant social change in America and the world. Over and out, all power to the people.